Welcome to the Agency Initiative podcast hosted by Kristen Cavanaugh and Mike Randolph. Authentic people, courageous stories. This podcast is sponsored by the Agency Initiative with the intention of building agency for the moments that matter. For more information about the Agency Initiative and to start your journey, check out www.agency-initiative.com. Welcome back to the Agency Initiative podcast, where we celebrate authentic people and courageous stories. In Season 2, the Agency Sessions, we're preparing for a special project by revisiting key leadership ideas from Season 1, which are enriched by working closely with our clients over the past year. I'm joined again by Kristen Cavanaugh. Hey, Kristen.
Hey, Mike. Good to see you again.
Yeah, we're in it now. So today, we're tackling a critical issue, the difference between courageous leadership and authoritarianism. Say that 5 times fast. We want to know how leaders can balance the authority needed to guide their teams with courage and empathy that builds trust and respect over time. In this episode, we'll explore what separates courageous leadership from authoritarian control and how to lead with integrity and empathy. Okay, so let's dive into our main discussion now. Let's start by defining the differences between courageous leadership and authoritarianism. Courageous leadership is grounded in values like trust, resilience, and curiosity. It's about creating an environment where people want to feel empowered to take risks and grow even when faced with tension or uncertainty. On the other hand, authoritarian leadership often relies on fear, control, and rigid structures that can stifle innovation or erode trust. The key distinction here is how leaders handle tensions, like conflict and uncertainty. A courageous leader will lean into these moments using empathy and decisive action to guide their team through, while an authoritarian leader might seek to control the outcome, often at the expense of their team morale and trust. Courageous leadership thrives on connection, while authoritarianism isolates. Okay, so I really want to dive into the difference now between, or the comparison between courageous leadership and authoritarianism. All right, Kristen, when you think about leadership, what comes to mind as the main difference between those two? We're thinking about what inspires courage versus someone who inspires or someone who relies on fear as part of their leadership approach.
I think this all comes down to values and what leaders value. And I think when you think about courageous leaders, they value things like trust and respect and collaboration and growth and integrity and all of those things that push an organization forward and push a team forward in a positive direction. And I think when you think about authoritarian leaders, it's all about power and control and fear. And I actually think like the need or the desire to hold on to power and control is all based in fear, and so maybe the value there is more insecurity. Yeah. Right. I don't know that that's a value, but maybe that's a feeling or a thought.
State of being, maybe.
Yeah. But I really think authoritarianism is all about trying to hold on to power and control at all costs, and blaming people instead of taking responsibility. And so, courageous leaders have the ability to reflect and analyze situations and find growth and opportunity where, authoritarians are just going to try and control everything and make it everybody else's fault.
I want to pose a question to you. Do you think there are leaders out there who are accidental authoritarians, who are maybe either acting out of fear or who don't recognize that what they're doing is what you just described, acting in a way that is controlling but it's as a response to external stimulus rather than intentionally showing up as an authoritarian leader?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of people, we used to talk about this when we were at Tesla. Most times people don't show up as a leader and want to be a jerk,
right?
And there are stories that we can tell about people that, yes, they're just a jerk and that's how they're showing up as leader, but maybe they just don't know a better way or they've never been taught a better way. And I think in some environments, authoritarianism works and is taught, and that's the way that you get things done. Like you look at the military as an example. Like there is a time and a place, and that's one of them. In certain cases in the military, that's one of them. And so if you have somebody who has been exposed to that type of power and controlled leadership, and then you put them in a different environment, if they don't know any better, they might accidentally show up in a way that isn't conducive and isn't aligned with who they truly are. It's just what they know.
Yeah, I think we've seen this, and I'm sure other folks have experienced this too, where it just there's the slow or the slippery slope to acting as an authoritarian leader, even with the best intentions possible, where you have somebody who is trying to maintain a team or an organization or some goal or some progress towards a goal, and it's little sacrifices that happen along the way. It's a change in the way that they talk to somebody here to have them get something done, or somehow they change the way their team operates, or one of the norms that are now moving towards that authoritarian, that more controlling environment, where again it's in service of the thing that they're trying to get done. Yes. But those slow changes over time tend to add up in a very unknown way, or not unknown way, but maybe unrealized in the moment until that it's too late at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this in terms of short-term gains.
Yes.
And I think, you can use fear and control for short-term gains. You just think about the carrot and the stick, right?
Right.
And it can work. And I think people can be confused by the success that they have from using a more controlling leadership style. But eventually that doesn't bear out over time. Mm-hmm. And so that's where people have to be willing to analyze what they're doing, reflect on what they're doing, how they're showing up, and be honest about the impact that that's having on the team and the organization, and then be willing to change. And so, absolutely. You can reap short-term gains, but at what cost for the organization or the team in the long term? Yeah,
it's interesting too, because I think what we are starting to explore now is how a leader handles the tensions, as we called them, change or uncertainty or conflict, or maybe even opportunity. Just those moments. We again, going back to our parlance, the moments that matter, those moments that are giving them the opportunity to navigate a tension. But I think that we see a difference between how someone who is practicing authoritarianism navigates those tensions versus someone who is practicing courageous leadership navigates those tensions.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in my mind, an authoritarian is always going to see tension as negative.
Okay.
And something that has to be overcome and dampened or something. And I think somebody that's a courageous leader can look at a tension and say, hey, there's something positive that can come out of this. There's something that we can learn. There's a way that we can grow. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big difference, is being able to view the tension for what it is and what it could be, and what your role in addressing that tension becomes, and the impact it has on the team and the organization. We talk about innovation a lot, right? And we joke about the robots and AI and taking over. And so I think a lot of that is a tension. Innovation and new technology is a tension that we have to deal with. And so you can choose to crush AI, or and say that we don't want AI taking over our jobs, or have that kind of mindset and not engage with the technology, or you can be open to it and have the courage to say, this is something that could be a game changer for all of us and be a positive impact. And so I think it really is that orientation toward the tension and what it could mean long term.
When you say that, it seems to go back to kind of where you started. It seems that there's this word. It seems that the authoritarian is, when they see a tension like that, it's a loss of control.
Yes.
They feel there's some tension that they are sensing, and that tension is not in line a lot of times with what they are expecting for that situation, because it's a tension.
Right.
So they are trying to find a way to get back in control, or to address that control. And so it's that loss of control that often dictates how they move forward from it, versus exploring it from a place of growth and curiosity.
Yes.
Ooh, let's understand that. Maybe we can get something out of it. That I think is some of the examples that we've seen are like, we know which direction we want to go. We're going that direction, and nobody's going to tell us any differently. Versus saying like, we know we need to go that direction, but we don't know what we're going to find along the way, and we're going to incorporate different changes.
Right. Absolutely. And I think the other thing too, as we think about this, and we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, but when we think about courageous leaders and courageous acts, we're not talking about battlefield heroics. Like, we're talking about small, tiny, courageous acts where you have the ability to lean into growth or lean into these other things. And I mean, it's similar for authoritarianism, right? Like, you can make really tiny steps of like tightening control on things. And so I want people to understand, we're not talking about like big magnitudes of things. We're just talking about the everyday tiny steps where you have the opportunity to be courageous or the opportunity to try and grasp onto control. So
like, when you're talking about those like tiny steps, how does that impact trust? How does that impact, we know that courageous leaders are going to build trust over time. We either have said that on in the podcast or just, but so like, how does the role of those small changes, the small steps over time, the small acts of courage, build trust within a team, within an organization?
I mean, trust is the factor. I think seeing those small acts of courage, whether that's somebody being vulnerable, whether that's somebody growing from a mistake or what have you, as teams see a leader step into their authenticity and exhibit those values like we talked about, like growth and integrity and collaboration, that helps build consistency and transparency and understanding with how that leader's going to show up. And so then you can kind of predict what's going to happen in certain situations. And so I think that trust builds with each little step that a team can know what their leader's going to do, how they're going to react, or a way that destroys trust too. And so I think it's all of those small steps that push a team in either direction, whether more trusting or not.
I think that predictability that comes with that is not predictability in the sense of like, I know the outcomes, like the outcomes are predictable. It's more in like, I know that my leader is doing a certain set of is soliciting feedback, is looking for opportunities for like reflection, is creating an inclusive team environment where everyone's voices are heard, like doing those in the practice of, hey, we are doing something together, we're building this thing together, but also so that way I know every single time that I have a viewpoint, I'm going to be able to give that viewpoint. So the trust comes from the what's the right word for this? For the expectation that it sets for me, and how that leans into the representation that I feel is part of that.
Yeah. I mean, you know what to expect from your leader when you go in and you give feedback, or you ask for feedback, or you bring up a difficult conversation, and I think like exhibiting those small steps over time gives signals to your team about what is possible in this organization, or what is possible and what is not. And leaders have to be aware of that as much as small acts can build trust, small acts can destroy trust too. And so you have to really have good self-awareness and openness, and I guess you have to have good self-awareness and the ability to receive feedback yourself if things that you're doing aren't building trust with the organization.
Yeah, there's a lot of like data behind this too. If you're just looking even at some of like the most recent like findings from Gallup. So Gallup released their global workplace report for 2024, and I don't think this is going to come as a surprise to anyone, but in there they report that managers are responsible for a 70% variance in employee engagement across the number of ways that a manager engages in that. But like, if you think about that is an outsized impact that a manager has on how engaged someone is at work, and it's the trust that is that drives so much of that engagement. Again, among other behaviors that a manager exhibits as part of that. But in the absence of trust breaks down engagement, but it also breaks down, someone's ability to work free from duress.
Right.
Like the stress that comes with, an individual who doesn't know what the situation is going to be, who doesn't have that baseline expectation. Like that's something that, again, in that same report, they talk about, leaders or organizations that have bad management practices or have management practices like we've been talking about, they're 60% more likely to feel stressed, or 60% more likely to feel a lot of stress. Mm-hmm. And that is detrimental to employee well-being. That's detrimental to organizational success and productivity. It's detrimental to absenteeism. Like there's a bunch of ways that absence of trust and mm-hmm. and stress that comes from that impact the productivity of a workforce.
Yeah. I was just going back and thinking about, I was at the Lesbians Who Tech conference last week.
Yeah.
There was a fantastic session on trust. And it was led by the chief diversity officer from LinkedIn. And so she was talking about this line really hit me. She said, the opposite of trust is deception.
Interesting. Okay.
And it's not secrecy. Like the opposite of trust is deception. It's like, whoa, that feels very active. You know,
the intentional obstruction of whatever that is.
Yes. And so I want to keep that with me and then offer that up to our listeners too, that trust is deep and important, and to your point, has such an impact on the way that team members feel and the way that team members start to perform. And so now we're talking about, the performance of a team just by these micro actions that we're taking to build or lose trust. And that's a lot of pressure on our leaders. But that's what you sign up for.
Sure. And to that point, like, I think this goes back to maybe the accidental authoritarian. Like, there are leaders out there who may just be burnout, mm-hmm. who may just be have that they themselves experienced so much of the stress that comes with the role that they're in, that like we can't discount that either. Like there again, going back to the Gallup Workplace report, they report that 25% of leaders feel burnout all the time. Mm-hmm. That's incredible.
Are you surprised? I believe it.
No, I'm not. I'm not surprised. But like the fact that 1 in 4 managers report being burnout all the time, like categorically across the board. What's even scarier is that they come back to say, and 2/3 of all managers feel at least burnout some of the time. Mm-hmm. So you are leaning on these leaders and asking them to be courageous or to not be accidental authoritarians, right? Where a lot of them are just working to survive.
Right. Yeah.
They're humans too. And that's the part that I think that often gets it's difficult for in leadership, because there's so much stress, especially put on the middle and lower levels of leadership, right, to not just be the voices for the company culture, for all of that, but also to hit their goals and to be effective people leaders. That compounds over time.
Yeah. I mean, just think about being a parent, how difficult it is to hold your shit together. Yeah. When no one says they want to be an authoritarian parent, but you know what? Sometimes
it's my way of the highway.
Right. It's accidental. Yeah. And you're right. Like that happens in the workplace too. And I think you compound that, we talk about Edelman's, right? Mm-hmm. So now you have employees who are looking at their employer as the
source of truth.
Right. And we've got, I don't know, I didn't do the math, like 70% of people who are miserable and burnout. Yeah. That doesn't feel good.
Yeah. It starts to create this, and again, this is why we think courageous leadership, the concept of courageous leadership and walking the path of a courageous leader is what our leaders need right now. It's something that they have to embrace. And again, it's not courage in the big moments, courage in the small moments. It's courage in those everyday moments. And I think that's so difficult for leaders who are just trying to survive. We know that. One of the biggest challenges for leaders is that oftentimes when they are met with those small moments, they may not have done the work on their end to be ready for that. And that's not a fault of any leader. I have this in my own moments, even today. So it really becomes not just about what you do but also who you are. And that's like a core principle of the agency loop and Robert Ellis's triple loop learning. And so like when we ask leaders to lead with courage, it's not just about their actions or the doing, but those actions need to align with their values, the being, and that's where we start to see these concepts come together. In the agency loop, we emphasize the tenets of intentionality and decisiveness in shaping courageous actions, and the values of trust and resilience in shaping who leaders are. So, for example, a courageous leader might seek input from one of their team members during conflict and make a decisive, intentional choice that aligns with their shared values. In contrast, though, like an authoritarian leader might make a decision in isolation and enforce that through control, regardless of how the team feels or input that they might have along the way. And so really the difference is between leading with empathy and leaning on power. And this is something we have to continue to unpack. So we want to explore like how leaders can move away from control and embody courage in their decision making. And that's where we'll spend a little time now. We really want to try to ground this in things that our listeners can take away. And so what we're going to take a look at now is like what actions a leader can take to move away from control and embrace courage. So when we think about like a difficult situation, Kristen, like how can leaders choose actions that reflect courage rather than control? What do they take to encourage open communication and build trust on their team? I think that's one of the core points that we've been talking about so far.
I mean, I think one of the fallacies is that that fast decision making is important to keeping the business moving quickly. And so that's what we hear all the time from our clients. It's like, we don't have time. We move fast here. What I think is a courageous act in those moments is to take a step back and collaborate and take the time to get input about decisions from stakeholders and from people who are the experts. I mean, we saw this all the time at Tesla, right? Like, for the sake of making a fast decision that was supposed to be moving the business faster, we would end up messing something up, and we would have to go back and do it again because we didn't talk to the experts who were in charge of the thing that we were changing. And so I think the sign of a courageous leader is seeing those moments where the goal is to move quickly and to help a team actually move slowly and more deliberately to get it right the first time. And we saw that all the time where something would happen and we would say, wait a minute, we own that, or like, we're in charge of that. Nobody talked to us. And so of course there's going to be implications and ramifications of that decision that was made in isolation. We could have helped mitigate that if somebody just would have talked to us. And so I think, speed becomes a blocker all the time. And so if you can, recognize that going slow will actually help you go fast. I think that's a pretty good sign of a courageous leader to step up in those moments.
Yeah, we see it a lot with clients that we talk with, and again in Tesla, where if you're not going fast, then you're losing. But really, you're sacrificing those long-term cultural changes that you need, especially in the work that we do with our clients. We're often working in cultural change or organizational values-based change that happens. And for humans and for behaviors to change, it takes time. Like we could teach somebody something today and they may start that practice now, but they won't see the benefits of the continued practice of that until 2, 3, 5, however many months down the road, but depending on what we're teaching them. And that change is slow. Like, it's slow because it's breaking of old habits, it's instilling new habits, instilling new values and perspectives that are reinforced by the experiences that people have and the emotions that they have in those experiences. And so that often takes time. And when we talk about fast decision making, you could say like, well, we're making a decision about a product, but if you're not incorporating the viewpoints of everyone who's around you consistently, if you are constantly talking over people in meetings, all of that, again, those are some of those practices that we see oftentimes in group settings or in team dynamics that undermine the trust of the organizations that are lean towards authoritarian control or favoritism or something like that, versus having open dialogues and really creating a collaborative and creative environment.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we heard from our clients that they didn't talk to who would be their customer internally, right? Like, and so you've made a decision and gotten yourself in a position because you didn't go talk to the people that had the problem that could help you figure out how to solve the problem. And I think that's it. Sometimes we just move so fast in the name of being a startup or, you know, like being scrappy or whatever you want to call it, that we actually shoot ourselves in the foot by just not talking to people.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because that lends itself to, okay, what's the mindset of leadership at that point, or the organization that puts you in that place. You know, talk about being scrappy or talking about moving fast and breaking things. Like those are fine, but that's an assumption of, there's an assumption of the values associated with that, but there's also an assumption of like, we do that. Well, that is an identity then at that point. Right. So what are the shifts that leaders have to make in order to really take the time to change from those more authoritarian practices that we see?
So what that made me think about was, do you remember a certain presidential candidate said, you know, I alone can fix this, right? I think that
presidential candidate might have said that this week.
Probably, I wouldn't be surprised. But I think that becomes part of the mentality is like somebody thinks, well, I'm the only one that knows how to fix this thing, so I'm going to make the decision, and that's final. And I think that gets organizations, it gets teams into positions where if you have somebody that really has that mindset, that they are the only person that can solve the problem, I mean, that's where we have issues. And so, you know, one of the reasons that I wanted to do this project is because we're starting to see a rise in that mentality.
Yeah, that's fair.
And we're seeing people mimic that mentality because that seems to be what's working or what is celebrated. And so I think that's something here too, that if you have leaders in your life and you have, you know, you're surrounded by leaders in your workplace or you on TV, it's almost that they become like caricatures of what leadership is, you know, and maybe that's not the right word. They become elevated. It's like, that's what leadership is. And then it becomes mimicked in various different ways throughout the organization. And so I think having role models that are courageous, who exhibit these values that we've been talking about, are really, really important, because otherwise we have people who are exhibiting the values that we don't want to see in workplaces, and that's becoming very, very popular. And so I think that's a big part of this too, is who are you looking at as your representation of what you think leadership should look like, and should we be questioning if those are the right people to be following or not?
It's funny, you talk about the caricaturization. You talk about the caricaturization of, or you know, creating the caricature. But I think for some folks, it's not a caricature, right? Like we say that because we have specific viewpoints, but like for others, it's the idolization.
Yes,
the
that's
opposite.
the word.
Yeah,
yes,
you know?
That's the word.
That's where you get those isolated, those isolated interpretations of what a leader should be. But that's also why growth and reflection are part of the process that we talk about as well, because like that reflection on like, hey, and frankly, the underpinning curiosity that you have to have as a courageous leader, like that's where that comes into play, because you have to be willing to sit down and again, think through, is this the right way, or are there other ways, or maybe I should explore other ways as part of that. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think idolization is spot on. And I think being willing to question why and who have become those leaders are really important. And I think the other thing too is like, what is it that you're idolizing, right? Like, because I think what people would tell you, it's the strength, it's the, you know, these, but is that really what we're seeing right? You know, I think we talk about like the strongman personality and like how that has become more prevalent, and that is kind of viewed as what leaders should look like. But is it? You know, I think about my kids. I have two boys, and the role models that they have for leadership, and it's like, oof, I don't know that that's really the kind of folks that I want them to look up to and to view as leaders who are exhibiting, you know, maybe they're getting performance, right? Like maybe they're having success, but at what cost to people around them, to organizations around them, to their own values and health and morals and all the things.
Yeah.
But I think we are seeing more and more of that strong man persona being elevated, or that strongman persona being put on a pedestal of like what leadership should be. And so again, that's why I think we have to have this conversation about courage versus this image that we're being told is what true leadership is.
It's curious you bring that up too, because you know, there's a very, someone could draw a very clear connection between the strongman persona and we talk in terms of like tenets of what we think are the process for being a courageous leader. And oftentimes we talk about intentionality and decisiveness as part of that. You know, there is a very clear or close relationship between the strongman persona and decisiveness. Like being seen as being decisive, but also being seen as the strongman persona. Right. But like those aren't the same things. Exactly. And especially in the way that we talk about it, like those aren't the same things.
Yes. I mean, I think it comes down to the calculus, right? Like that's how we talk about it. It's like the risk calculus and the intention calculus around this. You can make a decision, and you can make a decision definitively and quickly and strong-headedly as you want. Sure. But if you haven't run the calculus behind it, and I think that's where a lot of this is falling apart for me from like the strongman leaders. Great, you made a fast decision, but like the wake that you left in making that decision is just destructive. Yeah. And so
I think this goes back to, you know, we were talking last time about the difference between confidence and courage. Like if you go back to like, I can make a confident decision, but am I really taking into consideration that wake that I leave behind me versus making courage making a decision using courage or through courage, looking at the decisiveness, looking at the attention behind that and the impact then of what happens.
Yes. I mean, I am not a math person. I am not all about the calculus.
We're going to come up with it.
Right? But this is some calculus I do every single day.
Yeah.
You know, and I think if you want to be a courageous leader, it's got to be a part of what you do in figuring out what is your calculus and how do you make sure that you are keeping yourself honest to run that calculus for decisions, especially when they're critical ones.
Yeah. So that's really a great place for us to jump into our flashpoint, where we use this segment to have an argument, basically.
To rumble. We're
gonna rumble, yeah. To use Bernays' parlance for it, but yeah. So we're gonna get into our topic for today, and again rumble around: is it better for a leader to be feared or respected? So is that strong man coming through in the way that someone is feared, or is the courageous leader coming through and be respected, or is there some balance between both of those that show up in each of those personas? Okay, so. You know, in this one,
which one do I get?
Kristen, you get the respect side.
Oh, so that's kind of you. I was preparing to get feared.
No, because I think I have a viewpoint on this that could be interesting and that could lead to some important discussion. And so so Kristen, for our flashpoint segment, you get that it's better to be respected. Today, I'm going to take that it's better to be feared, and we're going to dive in and get this rumble going. Okay, so Kristen, do you want to start with being respected?
Absolutely, of course. I mean, I think we talked about this in our first segment. So I believe that fear-based leadership is something that's momentary. and something that might get you quick gains and easy gains, but over time, it's just not going to play out. And so I think if you are building a long-term, healthy organization, building resilience and building trust and building integrity, all of those things, a courageous leader is going to build all of those things into the organization and into the team. That's going to get you better results long term. And if we're building organizations, we've got to build them for the long term, not for something that's going to be here today or be here tomorrow. And so, in my opinion, it's better to do the hard work, to put in the effort to build those deep seated values inside an organization by showing up vulnerably and all the ways that a courageous leader has to show up to build those foundational elements into a resilient organization long term.
Yeah, I understand the perspective on this.
Fight me.
I'm gonna. Yeah. There are elements of fear-based leadership that get things done. Like fear is a potent motivator, and fear can help you achieve a goal, an objective in the moment that again gives you that opportunity to live to fight another day. Basically, like to use a military perspective on that. One of my favorite stories, I've used this before, but one of my favorite stories is the head coach of the 1980s men's Winter Olympics hockey team. And the way that he approached the movie Miracle is about like this, and talks about how Kurt Russell at the time, who was playing the coach, was basically a tyrant. Mm-hmm. He motivated a group of otherwise motivated individuals, players, to function as a team in service of hating him. Mm-hmm. And he played a role as part of that. Now, that was an intentional choice on his part that he was making, but it was what galvanized them to be successful in that moment, in that stretch, in winning the gold medal for that. Now, here's the thing. He was found out eventually because of that, because the players realized that what he was doing and that, but what he was able to do is he was able to help them set aside their own personal motives for being there, and help them build a collective identity as a team rather than, the group of individuals that came in and as part of that, the different players from the different college teams that hated each other because of the rivalries and all of that. So I think there is an opportunity for fear-based leadership to prevail in certain situations. Now, what I will say is that is temporary. Mm-hmm. And again, I think this, if we're going to not go too far into our flashpoint here, but
it's okay. I mean, Taylor would say it's temporary and unnecessary.
Yeah, maybe, but those players won the gold medal when no one thought they were going to win the gold medal. Would they have done that if the coach had approached it a different way? That we can only speculate on that.
I think that's fair. This is my only thing. And I'm going to bring it back to being a parent. Mm-hmm. And so I have used my fair share of fear-based leadership in my household.
Yeah, that's fair.
And it gets me absolutely nowhere. And so what I have to remind myself is that my kids aren't going to be in a battlefield somewhere.
Sure.
They aren't going to be winning any gold medals anytime soon. And so I've got to lean in to this courageous, more value-based style in my home to help my kids grow and blossom into the amazing humans that they already are. And so I think that's the thing. Like, yes, I do agree with you that there are, the Marine in me will tell you that there are times where fear-based, it's the way to go. The mom in me will tell you it's just not in parenting, and it's most often not in the workplace. I would agree with that. And oftentimes in the workplace, like, sure, there are, like, you have to meet a deadline, you have to hit a sales target, you have to meet a specific goal, but at what cost? Mm-hmm. For me, it's part of that. Again, I'm dropping the facade of you did great. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, you're welcome. I'm here all week. But like, there is, you have to factor in at what cost.
Right.
At what cost is this going? Is there? And again, to go back to use what you were saying before, what's the calculus? Like, mm-hmm. what is the outcome that you're going to get if you do act in a way that espouses fear versus trust? Mm-hmm. And is that sacrifice that you're making in that moment worth the gain that you're going to get as part of that calculus?
Right.
And if it is, then there might be use for it. If it is, there might be an opportunity to achieve that short-term objective. But it is not a long-term objective. Yeah. It's not a long-term objective for a healthy organization.
Right. I mean, that just made me think of like the trust versus deception, right? Like in thinking about your coach, right? Like, so that was deception in some bit, right? To play this role of the bad guy and the bad coach for a certain outcome. I wonder what would have happened if he would have trusted them enough to be like, I know what I'm doing, and here's how we're going to play this, and here's how we're going to build the team. I mean, the other piece of that is time. It's time bound, right? They did not have a lot of time to do this. So I don't know. More thoughts for us to talk about.
Yeah,
later.
well, it's easy to comment on a 44-year-old story right now, right? using our modern perception of what courageous leadership is versus what it was in the 1980s, 1970s. Really, it's easy to be speculative about that, but I think that there's opportunity for us to apply that, at least as an armchair quarterback. Speaking of armchair quarterbacking, what do you think? We want you to join in on the conversation, and so we're going to post this on LinkedIn and on Instagram, on our pages, and we want to know, is it more important from your perspective for a leader to be feared or to be respected? You can find us on our pages. You can see it as part of hashtag the agency sessions, and we want to hear what you think. So today, we've explored key distinctions between courageous leadership and authoritarianism. Courageous leadership, which embodies trust, resilience, and curiosity, builds lasting respect and drives innovation, while authoritarianism is focused on control, fear, and erodes trust and stifles creativity. I think that we've come to that as our conclusion for this. And we hope we've given you some things to think about, but as you're walking away from this, we want to leave you with a couple of questions that you can use to reflect on how you show up in moments of tension as a leader. Are you leaning into connection, or are you relying on control? Think about how you can cultivate more courageous actions by aligning your leadership with empathy and intentionality rather than a culture based in fear. And so you can think through like maybe a recent moment that you've had, or think about one step that you could take today, but just something small and something actionable, again, to have courage in the moments that you're meeting now, rather than, again, some big thing that you're facing in the future. Okay, so next time on the agency sessions, we're going to introduce you to a framework that we've been noodling over. We're thinking of calling it the agency loop. The episode's going to be titled the agency loop, but it's a framework that helps leaders navigate uncertainty with confidence, authenticity, and purpose. We'll break down the core components of the framework and show you how you can start implementing that framework in your leadership journey as well. Tune in to learn more about this approach and how it can help you step into being a more courageous leader. We want to hear from you. We want to hear how you balance authority with courage in your leadership. Share your thoughts on social media using hashtag the agency sessions. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram at the Agency Initiative. That's our company, for more updates. Let's keep the conversation going. Kristen, thanks so much again for sharing today. And I'm looking forward to our next session when we introduce our new framework.
Yes, same here. A great rumble today. I look forward to the next one.
I think I won.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Agency Initiative podcast. To take the first steps into your journey, or to dive deeper into what agency means in your life, check out www.agency-initiative.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at the Agency Initiative and on LinkedIn at our company page. If you're interested in working with us or joining us on this podcast, we want to hear from you. Send us a note at our contact page at www.agency-initiative.com/contact.